So good morning, everybody. Today is the 22nd of November, 2022, and this Zoom is with Liz Watson, who is ex-media, and she is here to talk about her particular case against the Lloyds Banking Group, Bank of Scotland, and there was the HBOS, their all parent company is Lloyds Banking Group. So Liz has been a victim for a very long time, and she knows a lot of the culture of banking crimes, banking frauds, and basically how it's frustrating for many people like us, including me, that these crimes are still taking place, even though there have been these criminal prosecutions against the same bank in 2018. So over to you, Liz.
Sure, thanks, Neelu. It's a good opportunity to share some salient facts. It's taken me a very long time to get to the bottom of the hijacking of our lives. And in fact, there are 3 or 4 separate frauds which span 29 years. But the one that grabbed most of my attention in the past 15 years, that's when the false court proceedings began, is that concerning HBOS, Bank of Scotland. What I didn't realise until quite recently is that HBOS is not a bank, it's a holding company. And it's always been a holding company. And we were deceived because they kept interchangeably using trademarks and the name Bank of Scotland unincorporated prior to the incorporation of Bank of Scotland PLC on the 17th September 2007. The frauds that I'm going to snapshot in the middle of the 29 years is what happened in 2001. 400 people, including 6 of my family, and including my husband and myself, were targeted as being so-called high net worth individuals. I think they categorized us in that range because we didn't have a mortgage at the time. We had equity in our property, and that was enough for them to think that you were high net worth. And there was something published under the trademark called In Parallel Solutions, and it's on all the early paperwork. And I think it's really important to share with everybody that I believe that the scourge of our nation, these shores in England, is shadow banking. What I mean by shadow banking is off-balance sheet transactions which have no standing whatsoever in law. There is no record on the bank's books as the banking charters require. Everything to do with law and order has been departed from. The shadow banking regime, which is like a government, a parallel government, ironically, the trademark they used was In Parallel Solutions. Solutions for what? For them to conduct ultra vires transactions and get rich on the back of stolen money with no footprint in the public domain. And finally, the penny dropped in the last 2-3 years that what they're actually doing is getting money for nothing. Money on the back of people's sweat equity, people's labor, people's life savings, their SMEs, their businesses, their land, their property, their holdings. And they're doing it by setting up, quite simply, cyber accounts. When I say cyber, I mean ultra vires accounts, not on the bank's books, not on any balance sheet in the world. And they're getting away with it because it's a racket, and it's been going on an incredibly long time. And what they did with the Vavasseur Dobb-White fraud, it was really an American fraud. It was called Vavasseur, which is a Bahamian company set up in the 90s by an American gentleman called Terry Dowdell. And he ended up with a prison sentence of 15 years in 2001. I don't know if he's still alive. And basically, he was trading securities being selling debts into the secondary marketplace. And I gather he used to do it legitimately with Merrill Lynch. Then a clone setup was created on behalf of Lloyds Banking Group, it's conglomerate. And I might add that the evidence I have access to shows that Lloyds were trading with Bank of Scotland, or HBOS as they call themselves, well before the so-called merger, which was just window dressing to deceive the public that they'd had this merger. At the time, Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, and he hailed James Crosby as the mortgage czar, if anybody remembers that, before eventually, some years later, when the proverbial hit the fan, he had to hand his knighthood back, but scuttled off scot-free. And anybody else doing that sort of thing would have been banged up in prison for a very, very long time. How is it that these people have acted with impunity and got away with so much for so long? What they did in the Vavasor fraud, quite simply, was they raised a lot of money very quickly in 18 months flat. They set up various vehicles to route the money through. They had an office at St. James's Place. St. James's Place had been acquired by James Crosby in October 2000 from J. Rothschild Assurance. He renamed it after himself, St. James's Place, to obviously start this plan of launching the shadow banking regime just after the millennium. And Britain was well behind. America had been doing securitization for years. But the thing is, HBOS broke all the rules because they were doing it with false instruments, fake accounts, because these accounts aren't accounted for. They can't be audited because they're not registered. And this is key. I realized gradually that every time the revolving doors with the Financial Ombudsman Service, the Financial Services Authority or Financial Conduct Authority, the SRA, all the people involved in the whole banking shooting match were all saying, we've got no remit, we can't do anything. And eventually they admitted, we cannot deal with unregistered debt. These debts are not registered. They don't exist on any record anywhere. Therefore, they're untradeable debts. But what Lloyds Banking Group is doing is they're trading untradeable debts, cyber debts, fake accounts linked to fake accounts, and they're swapping assets of real value drawn from your sweat equity, yours and my assets, houses, savings, pensions, properties, using false instruments, fake bank accounts. They're swapping fake bank accounts for real money, and then they create an exit to take the money without a footprint by pretending, oops, the market failure. They pretend they've suffered collateral damage. What they've done is they've actually taken your assets, your surety that put up the money for the transactions that they were trading and securitizing, selling debts on, which weren't real debts, because although they create a debt and you're burning a hole in your pocket, they're taking that money and they're trading it elsewhere and not telling you. That's what they've been doing now for 2-3 decades. It's quite a lot to get your head around, but once you've got your head around it, you'll realize shadow banking, why is it not made illegal? Why do the police say this is civil? I agree with you, Neelu, that all these transactions, these toxic debt transactions, have been engineered over 2 to 3 decades to create money for nothing with no footprint. It's a very lazy way, a very totally dishonest and criminal way of shoring up profits for these unworthy criminal fraternities calling themselves a major bank with all their sorry, is the sound okay?
Okay, sorry, yeah, I was going to say, can I just go back to your particular case now? You've given us a wonderful background of the horrors of this pattern affecting the rich, basically the millionaires. the targeting of destroying of the best achievers, successful, honourable people, you know, as you say, blood, sweat and tears, I like to call it. So coming back to your particular case, there was, so your case to me, if I can just sum it up for somebody in 30 seconds, is really that they had admitted that there was a bookkeeping error and that there was this fake account and there was this fake debt and that they were going to erase this account.
Yes, that was in 2013. I'll tell you how that came about. Before I explain that bit, I'll just tell you that they set about with an army of foot soldiers, and there were about 35 agents, all working under Club 100, which was a name set up by the head auditor of HBOS called Fraser Mackay. And they chose to route the Ponzi scheme, as it was, turned out to be, from the private banking unit in Manchester. And Fraser Mackay was not only the head auditor at the bank at the material time, but he was also the director of private banking. And I think they did that because it was easier to steal the money and squirrel it offshore. So their game plan was to raise as much money from high net worth people who were targeted by the team of 35 agents who all had international business corporations set up at St. James's Place, and they worked on commission only. And if anybody wants to see the evidence, look up the FSA final notice report, 9th of June 2004, and it's all there. And they don't even name the major bank. They said there was a major bank and that they were sending money offshore to Gerrard's Bank in the Isle of Man, and from there they were sending it on to other places. Well, the other places turned out to be Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, and a man called Robert Lockyer in Jersey set up a series of master trusts in late 2002 from the permanent master issuer series. And the ones they set up were called Permanent Finance number 1 to 9 PLC. And they were run out of Jersey with carrying the stolen monies. And then what they did was they traded them as if they were mortgage-backed securities, when in actual fact there was no mortgage, and they were linked to false mortgage accounts, false instruments, which thereafter they kept migrating to try to lose the absence of an audit trail and keep the cover-up and the spin going. And they've successfully kept that cover-up going for 2.5 decades. And I believe they've amassed more than 37 trillion pounds in the last 25 years, which has been confirmed to me by American attorneys from a very reliable source in the last couple of years. And to me, this is absolutely horrendous that the Treasury and the National Audit Office are looking the other way, turning a Nelsonian blind eye and saying, not me, Gov, we can't deal with that. It's not in our remit. If it's criminal, which it clearly is, it's not our remit. It's a
let's talk about the criminal prosecution here now. That the 2018. Well, when did you become aware of the criminal prosecution against the HBOS by the Thames Valley Police Crime Commissioner?
Well, I became aware that it had suddenly happened because I came across Nikki Turner around 2009, and I got talking to her quite a lot when I met one of the villains at Champneys, and I took a lot of evidence. I remember being on the phone to Nikki at midnight, sharing contemporaneous evidence. And after that, things just snowballed very quickly for them. And at the time, it was around 2016. And I just remember they went very quiet, and Nikki was a very good blogger, is a very good blogger. And she managed to raise her voice above the parapet in the right way. And I think eventually people sat up and took notice, because, you know, it's a squeaky wheel that gets oiled, not the one that stays silent and doesn't move. So yes, so I think I became aware of the criminal convictions in 2017, and I kept thinking ours would follow soon after, because our case was actually much bigger. And many of the same features in the Turners case are in the Vavasseur fraud case, Vavasseur Dodd White fraud, which happened about 3-4 years earlier, i.e. from the millennium, from late 2000, when Crosby acquired St James's Place, and went on to about 2003 or January 2004, which is when the Reading fraud, they then shifted the focus from the retail market, the personal retail market, over to SMEs, which was, of course, the Reading office was running this Quayside scam, accounting scam, and everything that went with it. The Vavasseur fraud.
Remind me what the SME stands for again.
Small and medium enterprises, business enterprises.
Okay.
The Vavasseur fraud is very, very much bigger. I believe the Reading fraud was around 5 billion. Ian Fraser said that was the true figure. They weren't allowed to go above 1 billion. They contained it very much to try to keep it under control. I mean, why is that allowed? Why can't the truth stand alone? The Vavasseur fraud is hundreds of billions. And I want to draw the public's attention to BBC mainstream news around 2009, 2010, when Paul Moore, the head of risk lending at HBOS, said on national television that hundreds of billions of pounds had been squirreled offshore to countries like Jersey. And this is the slush fund I'm talking about, which is still running, by the way, undeterred, unabashed. And they are making money for nothing. And this is how they've amassed trillions and trillions from stolen money, which is being illegally handled, which comes under the Theft Act 1968, handling stolen goods. And of course, where are KPMG in all this? The frauditors, the fraudulent auditors who signed off a clean bill of health before the crash, giving the Bank of Scotland and HBOS a false send-off, when actual fact there was a big hole in their balance sheet. And does everybody know that there was a secret bailout from the Bank of England of £25.7 billion before the merger, before the crash, which inevitably resulted from the black hole, which was made by the absence of the collateral? Where did the collateral go that led to the profits? Because you have to have it in the balance sheet, the collateral on one side and the profits on the other side. Otherwise, how did the profits come from the sky? So this is the other thing. What they did to get around that little problem was they set up a Parliamentary Act, HBOS Reorganisation Act 2006. And if you look that up, it allowed them to backdate all transactions to the millennium and, in effect, treat them as if they were all kosher. Well, these were all shadow bank accounts. These weren't on ledger. How could they ever be kosher? How can you turn a duck into an eagle?
So can I just bring that point up a little bit? That I was reading somewhere about the Lloyds banking group that it's partly shared by the government owned. Is that correct? Because they made that law.
Because they did the false flotation of shares. What they did was they'd stolen all the money. They managed to keep the profits under this illegal, undemocratically passed act, Reorganisation Act, which should be revoked. And after that, after the secret bailout, they did the fated merger, knowing that it was going to cause a crash, because they had. The only reason they had the bailout from the Bank of England was to fill the black hole so they could go ahead with that merger, because they were trying to stay in the game, but they were doing it with committing serious organised crime with the public absolutely green as to what was going on, completely oblivious. Can I just sum that up? Sorry to interrupt you. That this was a premeditated agenda, policy, law to cause the people of England and I guess the rest of the world, because you're saying that they had tentacles abroad with this. They've already channeled this money abroad, and we don't know where it's ended up with. What did they? Well, I've traced the money. I've traced the money. I'd like to say something on that, Neelu. I'd rung up the Treasury originally in 2016. when the Turner's case came into the mainstream news, then again in 2018, and then again in 2022. And the last time I had a letter from a director of the National Audit Office, Simon Reason, and he apparently is there to deal with the legal side of the National Audit Office or the Treasury's role in relation to National Audit Office. And I said to him, how can you be wearing the same hat when you're on separate sides? You know, if you're there to oversee at the National Audit Office how government departments are being run, surely that includes the Treasury. Who's calling the shots? You're saying that you're signing off as the National Audit Office, and at the same time you're saying you're director of the Treasury. So this is what's going on. We've got sort of Chinese walls and revolving doors, and you know, these may be good people, but they're not paying attention. And all he could say to me was it was outside of his remit. And I will share that letter, and you can upload it perhaps after I've done this. I'll get you that letter. In fact, I've actually got it on my table just across the room. But it's an extraordinary letter because he admitted having responsibility for what went on at Lloyds, because what they did, knowing that they'd had the 25 billion.
What I can do is I can pause it here and you can get it. 1 second. Yes.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add is that after the crash, they of course they knew why the crash had occurred. It's because they had all these profits with no collateral to underpin the profits. So how did they get those profits? They then brought out the HBOS Reorganisation Act, and then the government allowed HBOS and RBS and about 4 other banks, all of who I don't think partook, but HBOS and RBS did, to create £800 billion to create a share flotation, knowing that the share price had plummeted from £4 to 40 pence per share. And they then did this flotation, which was completely fake, on stolen money because of the HBOS Reorganisation Act. I think they must have got the money from the HBOS Reorganisation Act, which allowed them to keep the profits they made from stolen funds. And nobody's addressed this. And if the police aren't trained in fraud, how can the police deal with crime, as the National Audit Office say? You know, why are the National Audit Office abdicating responsibility, knowing that we must have about, you know, major problems with the policing in Britain? 43 police forces, they're not coordinated, and they blight our prospects of getting anywhere, because all of the 43 forces are run like companies with their own policies, and they use divide and rule. And they say, well, if you're living, you know, in Cheshire, then you can't go to, you know, the City of London Police. But then if the bank is everywhere in every town, why is there all this demarcation between the police forces? But of course, because it's not centralised, and of course, you know, the City of London Police should be all over this like a rash. It doesn't make sense why we seem to be frozen out of remedy in law, because what is happening is clearly criminal. And, you know, to be taking people's identity, using it to open up bank accounts in their name without their signature. In our case, they've opened and migrated 7 different bank accounts. It's also illegal to migrate a mortgage or loan account. Not that they've ever had one, of course, because I have it in writing from Bank of Scotland that they have no loans in our name. I have it in writing that they have no mortgage. There's no records the mortgage was granted. So why have my husband and I been made bankrupt? We've actually been made bankrupt by Eversheds, solicitors. The banks, the criminal fraternities operating the shadow banking setups are using the big bank names, but they're running a criminal setup through trademarks. I want to mention the Bankers Book Evidence Act 1879. It says in the Bankers Book Evidence Act that they have to produce the evidence on the books of every transaction, every mortgage, every loan, every account that exists. People have often tried to go to the British courts and get disclosure of the evidence of the debt on the register of the bank, and they can't get it. and some of them apply for Norwich Pharmacal orders, and they can't get them. And there's actually a let-out clause under paragraph 6 of the Act, which is a one-page Act. And if you look it up and study paragraph 6, it says that the court shall not compel the bank to produce its books if the transaction has not occurred in the course of normal business. Now, here is the key, because these shadow banking transactions are not normal business. Therefore, the court sees no obligation to compel the bank to show, to incriminate itself and tell the truth. Well, actually,
rather than so why don't we go back to the criminal prosecutions now, because all of those civil laws were designed to allow the bank to criminally cover up its tracks in the auditing of the theft. So, but now that we've had these prosecutions in 2018, and then the jailed went to the Southwark Crown Court, which I don't understand how they could have been criminally prosecuted in the Southwark Crown Court and go to the Southwark Crown Court to reduce its sentences. I thought they'd have to go higher jurisdiction. But anyway, they did, and this is 2020 EWCA Criminal 369, that their 50 years of total jail was not reduced by the 3 judges. So they failed to, basically, their jail sentences got rubber stamped. So now that you've had these 2 attempts to reduce the sentences and they failed, now you would think that would set the precedence to other bankers in the same bank that were doing what they were jailed for, and to stop them now. So to me anyway, this in July 2018, the cooperative bank trading as Britannia stole my house, and then now in 19th of October this year, 2022, they have stolen my sister's house, late sister's house. So they're stealing from the dead, even 4 years after that they were jailed.
Yeah, so, when you say they, I think this is a very important point you've brought up here. If you look at Santander, I've seen one of their handbooks from about 2016, and it's a very interesting thing because every bank has to produce a handbook, and they have to disclose at what percentage of their workforce of employees are committing fraud. And I believe it was something like 30% of the workforce at Santander were committing fraud. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's pretty much the same, between 30 and 40% across the board. That's an incredibly high percentage of the workforce of the bank. I think what's gone on with the Reading fraud is they got the patsies, the fall guys. They didn't get the real recidivists at the top, which these frauds are happening at board level. On the Vavasour fraud, I remember Stephen Myers from the Serious Fraud Office saying to me in 2006, when he sat in my dining room taking a witness statement from me arduously with his pencil and rubber and book, and he was writing down what I said, and it took 4 months, and they were living in my area and staying in the Accor Hotel, him and Seema Popat, the lawyer. And because I used to have epilepsy, I had trouble recalling a lot of the details initially. And although there'd been a cessation of the disability I had for many, many years, which they took full advantage of, he helped to trigger the memory recall. And I remember thinking, I said to him, why aren't you prosecuting the bank? Why are you prosecuting the agents? Ganga and White, Shinder Singh Ganga, Alan White, both got 7.5 years in jail in their first sentence. And then for failing to meet the confiscation order when they had never been the fiduciaries, the fiduciary was always Bank of Scotland. There's even records at the FSA that they were fined heavily, but they still did a stitch up at the criminal trial, which was a mistrial for that reason. And it was a cover-up, and that cover-up has continued for 21 years, and the money is still missing from the 400 victims on the creditors list. And they created a decoy by nailing the agents instead of the principals, and the real villains got off scot-free. But I promised on the Holy Bible that Stephen Myers at the SFO said to me, we can only prosecute the bank if the frauds happen at board level. Now, I believe we have sufficient evidence to prove that not only were the Reading frauds happening at board level, but we've got incontrovertible evidence that the frauds were happening at board level on the Vavasour fraud. James Crosby being key, you know, naming St. James's Place after his namesake, James, you know, buying it from Rothschild, lurking behind the scenes, you know, and then using Isle of Man to get the money offshore so it was easier to steal. That was confirmed by a barrister in London long time ago, about 2005. And that was their game plan. They had the sales agents.
I just, because I really want us to focus on how we go forward from here. So I really want, I get the flow that the entire government, the entire regulators and the banks were one and the same in the crimes that were committed against their own people. So I'm thinking maybe the charge of treason comes in maybe to the finance ministers all along the way, who had to keep the criminal cover-up all across. And maybe the chancellors of the exchequer were in on it.
Indeed. So, I'd like to draw the attention to BBC One Inside Out South documentary that was broadcast first on the 3rd of March 2014. And Ian Fraser, the author of Shredded, who is an amazing investigative financial journalist in Edinburgh, and he actually also knew an awful lot about the Reading fraud. You know, he's a very good authority on the matter. He's made several documentaries, and clearly, you know, he was saying it's just unbelievable how much they seem to act with impunity and get away with it, and nobody pulls them up on it. But at the end of the day, it's a racket. It's racketeering. You know, these people, he talks about capture regulators. Well, the FSA are capture regulators. It's capture regulation. It's not independent. The Treasury aren't independent. The Financial Reporting Council, I don't believe, are independent. Just like the SRA aren't independent. You know, they say that our judiciary and our courts are independent from government. How can they be? All the judges are being pensioned and paid by the government. You know, where is the independence there? You know, it's almost like a brainwashing, and everybody says it by rote. But think about it. Is it independent? If you walk into a court and they use the big name like Bank of Scotland, which was once a very fine bank, people immediately sway in favour of the bank, who've got a massive advantage over you and I, and they get different listening and different audience altogether. And the fact that
is that because there's bribes involved, there's promotion involved when they do these crimes? The bigger the crimes, the bigger the promotion.
Well, shall we call it inappropriate? Shall we use the words of Theresa May, inappropriate contracts? I will never forget her talk to the Dorset police in May 2014 before she became Prime Minister. And she said that they were disgusted to find that the Dorset police had over 55 inappropriate contracts. You know, what are these inappropriate contracts and why has nothing been done about it? Bribes, favors, people being bought and paid for. Worse, we've got a lot of big name law firms who are writing their own orders. And why not? Because nobody's stopping them. Did you know that any solicitor can go to the e-filing desk in the RCJ and get the clerk to rubber stamp an order without it even going before a judge? How many people know that? You know, it is so shocking. I mean, I wrote a whole article about compliance, the lack of compliance in British courts, the horror story that emerges from that, the fact that there is no attention given to the due process, to the court's overriding objectives, to the, you know, the issuance of a claim, the sealing of the claim, the certificate of service, No judge I've ever been before, and there must be over 30 of them in the last 15 years, has ever said, where is the issued claim? Where is the certificate of service? Where is the proof that the fee was paid? This is laundering. The courts have become a prop and a tool used by court officers. The court's own officers are doing these frauds. These major banks could not be pulling off these frauds without the help of the legal, should we call them profession, or should we call them a mafia? I'm not saying all of them are, but how many solicitors are there who are dealing with things equitably? It is only equitable law that can get us out of these booby traps that they're setting all around us, and adjudicating.
But why don't we mention about the precedents of the criminal prosecution? Because criminal law is based on precedents. That's the thing, is so that if someone murders somebody, you hang them, then people know that if they murder somebody, they will be hung. That's the precedent that goes inside the minds of people, that stops them killing other people. So now that we've had these criminal prosecutions in 2018, why are the banks? So basically, I'm saying that we can prove that the criminal justice system in the UK is non-existent, is shattered, does not work.
I agree. I think it's broken. It's completely broken. It's run on salmon tins, if you've heard that expression. I don't think they know what they're doing. I think it's terrifying to fall into that orbit. I would never, if I could have done things differently, I had no conception that the trickery and the deception, duplicitous behavior of court officers going on for years. I kept wondering, how come this order was made and I never even knew there was a hearing? How come the file records don't show anything to do with this order? And then I found out it was clear forgery. Who was doing the forgery? Must have been Eversheds. Who were Eversheds? Who set up Eversheds? Was it Lord Newburgh when he was Master of the Rolls, who became the head of the Supreme Court, who I believe has a relative or a daughter who is a partner at Eversheds? How is it that Alan Jenkins, ex-CEO of Eversheds, is sitting on the board today, as we speak, of the Financial Ombudsman Service? Not only that, Alan Jenkins is also sitting on the board of the Crown Prosecution Service. Isn't that a conflict of interests of gargantuan proportions? Revolving doors, worse than. That to me is sickening. Does anybody know how Eversheds are playing a very dangerous role and are being protected by the whole shooting match? When I say the whole shooting match, I'm talking about the judge, the juries, the police. They're trying to abolish juries, of course, because they don't want any competition. They want to be referees in their own game. They want to clean up nicely on all your assets and take ownership and play God to the world and kill off all free enterprise and independent living and creativity. To me, it's just so oppressive.
Can I bring you back to our win that way? So we're going to win. Okay, we are going to win.
Yes.
And we've identified the entire, shall we call it, the criminal empire of the world in the City of London. And you've got all the actual, ways that they've done this to make us think that this is all okay, and they all believe that they're acting lawfully and legally and not criminally. It's like an act. These people are actors, aren't they? They're just put in these uniforms. But my point
let's
is,
just look at let's look at the foundations of it, Neelu. If you go to the Crown website and you look up what it says about the Crown Corporation and the City of London, it clearly states that the City of London is outside the laws of England. The square mile is outside, exempt from the laws of England. Well, that's where the RCJ is. So is the RCJ exempt from the laws of England? Does that mean they can do what they want without with everybody acting on assumption and presumption, they walk into there thinking they're going to get a fair hearing, when actual fact, they're in a building that's got a decree that says it's operating outside the laws of England. Has anyone ever looked into this? It doesn't make sense to me. Is that why they've got their own police force?
Let's again move on to the criminal prosecution's precedents, because that's our open door to get what we need to get. Even though the top knobs got away from the criminal prosecution, but the efforts of the Crime Commissioner Anthony Stansfield stand as being the greatest achievement in bringing the bankers into the criminal courts and spending 7 million of that money budget of that police force on doing something that nobody else did. The CPS should have done that free of charge.
And the saboteurs were well at work by making sure that no police force would ever do what the noble Thames Valley Police Force did, because of course they came out of pocket. They came out worse off. Now, and of course, all the police forces are going to think, well, why are we going to, burn up our budget and go on fight fraud? It doesn't pay. Why don't we just stick to speeding fines and, and nailing people who are drunk and disorderly, or whatever it is they're spending their time.
What I find so shocking is that Anthony Stansfield's statement was very powerful. January 2018. There was a link to that statement that took you straight to the Thames Valley Police, website. If you try to put the link on now, it just goes to the homepage. That they've wiped it off. And if you put Anthony Stansfield in the search box, it's been wiped out. And I find that quite shocking. That
I think it's extremely shocking. I think they've got blood on their hands. They have not got clean hands. Interestingly, Stephen Myers, who was the head of the Vavaster case for over 5 years, when the BBC broadcast the Inside Out South documentary about Fraser Mackay and showing how he took early retirement and went on trekking holidays around the world on the proceeds of crime, the fact was he pocketed all the money from the fake accounts he set up, because he'd been charging all the victims interest on those false transactions, which were shadow transactions not on book. Therefore, why was he charging interest? It must have gone straight in his back pocket. That's what funded his early retirement. Nobody has looked into it. I've got his transcripts from the criminal court. I gave evidence for a week before I had a 30% then knowledge of what I have now. I would have given my evidence completely differently if I had with the passage of time. I would like to see that case reopened. It went on for 8 months. The SFO must have spent many millions. It was wasted money because the way it was handled was appalling. For a start, they were prosecuting the wrong people. There was no fair trial because the real people, they were leaning the rudder on the wrong wall from the off. And worse, DLA Piper, which is the notorious law firm that's always been backing HBOS as long as we can remember, they seized control of the criminal trial. And how did they seize control? Well, they artfully offered the director of the Serious Fraud Office, Robert Wardle, a job as an anti-fraud consultant to go and work for them. And he instantly resigned before the trial began. Have you ever heard of such a thing? That not only...
Okay, so let's just come back to the fact that this entire criminal empire has made us believe that they're all acting in a civil manner, and it's nothing to do with any criminal matters.
Well, let me just elaborate how they did it. I'm giving you the methodology they've used, because after hiring Wardle to go and work for them and his resignation, he failed to discharge his duty to the Crown and the creditors. That is against the Criminal Justice Act and the Criminal Courts Act. Then they used the protagonist of the heist, the very man who set up the fake accounts in the first place, and charged interest on the fake accounts, which of course went in his back pocket. So he cut and run when the balloon went up and pulled his parachute to escape. Fraser Mackay. He was used as a witness to the prosecution counsel by DLA Piper. You know, the very protagonist became a witness. And of course, justice got perverted. And I've got his transcripts. So if, you know, this is very key. I mean, this should be on Newsnight. They should be looking at this. They should be examining the methodology they're using. I asked Adam Wiseman from the Dobbs Review, who I saw 2-3 times. I said, what is your degree in, Mr. Wiseman from Redline Chambers? And he said, methodology. And I thought, gosh, that's interesting. What is the methodology these criminals are using? They get their backs covered every step of the way. And the biggest back covering is using decoys, using agents, patsies, fall guys, so that the real villains walk into the sunset. They walk off scot-free.
Yeah, but basically they all get shot in the back along the way, don't they? Because they're made to do escalating crimes, and there comes a point where they say, no, I'm not doing that. And that's when they actually do get disappeared then permanently.
But I think regardless, what is very obvious is happening is that when these serious organized crimes are happening, those responsible and are supposed to be accountable under all the, you know, the FSA rules and everything, they all seem to just get off the hook. And they'd rather pay the fines and write it off as the cost of doing business, because any fool can pay a fine, especially with stolen money, and that's what they're doing.
Well,
I mean, doesn't that show how?
Let's not make it so hopeless for ourselves, because over the years, more and more people have been victims, and we do have a lot of victims that have got similar stories of crimes being committed against them by the bank, by the government, by the courts, the solicitors, as you say, the regulators. They're all in it together to rob us, the people, which is treason. It's a charge of treason, and we really need to start using the Treason Act, because the public servants, as you say, are not really providing any public service as such. So we don't have a government as such. We don't have any public services as such, because they've all been hijacked by criminals, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or the finance industry. So
it does appear that way.
Yeah,
I agree, and people can't believe it in America and other countries. They can't believe the way things are being run, and I think it's particularly dangerous in Britain because of the British stiff upper lip. They're very good at, you know, playing things down, and that is to the detriment of the people.
But the other thing is that once you become a victim, you are in despair, and you're on your own. Basically, nobody wants to talk to you, because your friends will just think there's something wrong with you. How can you have so many enemies or overnight? And then most people die fighting, and that's the thing. It's an ambush. And what it is a criminal conspiracy to end your life, really.
I know that. It's genocidal, and the you know, the wholesale. It's worse than the Pirates of the Caribbean. I would call it torture. The number of people that have been tortured because there's no exit. They can't settle, they can't communicate, they are ostracized, they're marginalized, they are frozen out. And that is gangland culture. That is a gangland culture that is prevalent. And, you know, they're doing it with alacrity, and they have the temerity to talk about, you know, this country, the Ukraine, you know, offshore here, offshore there. They don't look at their own backyard. They don't look at how their people are suffering. They think nothing about people being thrown on the street with all their belongings still in the house. You know, every 15 minutes, they're stealing a house by false paperwork in Britain. Every day, I believe they're bankrupting between 500 and 700 people a day, or probably more now. It's going up and up and up. And most of those people are highly solvent. They ignore the statutes that were written. They don't follow due process. There's no enforceability against them, and they self-regulate. In other words, they don't regulate anything, because you leave it to themselves. You know, the fox running the hen coop. You know, this is what's going on. They're eating everybody alive. I think the insolvency mafia must be the most appallingly run criminal cabal, probably out of all the government departments, where are base in all this? Business, energy, innovation and skills. And their motto is delivering economic confidence. Well, to whom? To whom are they delivering economic confidence? To themselves.
So were you going to tell us where this money ended up abroad? Were you going to cover that? Did you cover that?
Yeah, it's in Jersey. The American attorneys explained to me they'd set up these 9 master trusts, and they set up hundreds of thousands of sub-trusts, around 350,000 sub-trusts per master trust. And if you do the maths, each trust was on average netting $4 to $5 billion a year. And if you multiply that by the number of trusts and do the maths, it's something like 1.7 trillion pound a year being generated on the back of these dissections. And who guards the guards? Who will stop them? Who is going to complain when it's lining their pockets so easily, so fluently, so without anyone creating a hue and cry to put a stop to it? And why would they? Because it's easy money, but they're not looking at the nuclear fallout.
So coming back to your remedy, what do you seek as your remedy now? Because there's talk of financial settlement, but that doesn't really bring you back your life and your health and your family and everything else.
Well, the remedy has to come first with truth, because truth will prevail. Truth has always prevailed throughout history. And what we're seeing is chaos, lawlessness, greed, unbridled greed, laundering every way, and calling black white and green red. Everything is upside down. I see the remedy has to come from vindicating the victims and actually putting the bank in the corner for a change and saying to its directors, do you have this bank transaction on your records, on your books? Show us. Where did this debt arise? Is this debt registered or unregistered? What is the license number of the bank you're referring to? If you go to Companies House, there are hundreds and hundreds of versions of the conglomerate inside Lloyds, with all of its separate, trading names, Cheltenham and Gloucester. They've got so many of them, Halifax PLC, Bank of Scotland, nominee accounts, half of them aren't licensed, probably more than half. Lots of them aren't licensed. It's shambolic. This is what I don't understand. How can you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of banks all trading under the conglomerate, like a cell division, and nobody can keep track of which ones are licensed? And it should be one monkey, one banana, but they're all, a lot of them, like a carousel boiler house, they're sharing one license, if you ask me. I mean, nobody's ever looked into it. Companies House claims to be distant. I have it in writing from Companies House that it does appear that Lloyds is engaged in fraudulent trading. But who will take up the cudgels of that statement? Because each time
let's come back to the solicitors, the Eversheds, the Walker Morris LLP, the others that you mentioned, DLA Piper.
DLA Piper,
and I had
Texas Law.
Texas Law was
stole my house. Mm-hmm.
So this network of criminals, they're still out at large and they're at the top. They're still committing their crimes. They're making a mockery.
This is a very interesting point, because
system.
This was identified. Noel Edmonds rang me in 2019 and he said, they're actually spending nearly £1 billion. It could be more than £1 billion a year on legal bills. When you think about it, how much are they stealing? If they're spending £1 billion defending their crimes, how much are they owing back? How if they paid that money not to lawyers but to the victims to give them the money back, how much is the real figure? I mean, I think back to Paul Moore's National News announcement when he said hundreds of billions have been squirreled offshore under Crosby's watch. And there was an article by Ian Fraser saying the wheels are falling off. And you know, Paul Moore, for doing his job, got sacked and was devastated. And
I still come back to Anthony's statement, because he is authority as crime commissioner of Thames Valley Police. His statement actually, I think, put the figure at 200 billion every year since 2000.
It wasn't his figure. That was actually a survey done by the Criminal Justice Studies at Portsmouth University in 2016. And they found, and this is very, very, very conservative, and I reckon the figure's probably 100 times that, they were saying there was evidence of £200 billion a year being squirreled out the economy. And that was, you know, as I say, 7 years ago. The real figures, I would think, is way, way higher than that. We all went to Portsmouth University. I organised a meeting there with Professor Mark Button. And just before the decoy lockdown occurred, you know, the whole decoy to make everybody think the government was looking after public health when there was something else, another agenda altogether going on. Probably it's a no-go area. But I've always thought, you know, all wars are banking wars.
Yeah. So coming back to because I want to go with the jurisdiction of the criminal prosecution, and that is the only way we can get a remedy, I believe. That because of the precedents, they've already prosecuted whatever they did and did not do. We still have that to go forward with, that baton. And I think that Anthony is our kind of guide in that. First of all, Anthony needs to get the money back for the Thames Valley that they spent. They need the confidence into the police that the Home Office should be funding. In a democracy, the Home Office should be funding all crimes committed against the people of the democracy, so-called democracy, and not left to individuals' honor, as in, you know, any honorable public servants are constantly being. He was, you know, they're being persecuted and they're being libeled. And like I'm libeled, I'm a struck off pharmacist, you know, because I dropped the death rate in the NHS by 30%. They found that I brought the profession into disrepute because I gave them 60 names of doctors, nurses, and pharmacists who knew that my baby niece was given an unlicensed drug. She was 5 months old. That's unlicensed in children under 2 years of age. So all the MHRA, I have a case against the MHRA that they allowed the use of unlicensed uses of drugs against babies in babies departments, causing these deaths in the NHS, and that you know, that case, the criminal case, is that very simple, that the MHRA is failing where these murders have occurred, failing to do their remit.
It's so mind-boggling and so frightening. It's so frightening when you think of the trust that's being breached. I mean, I just can't get my head around it.
So with the financial sector, this is like I'm really new to this. I have no idea that I've just learned about the securitization of our birth trust funds. Is that they steal from our birth trust funds, which are generated upon our births in the countries of our birth.
Yeah, they're trading your birth bonds, basically. You know, they're using it is identity fraud. They're using your identity to commit identity fraud by opening up accounts in your name, migrating them, and leveraging each account and creating new transactions on the back of it, like a pyramid. And you know nothing about it. And then they invent a reason for, you know, some sort of crash or some event, and they always have players who appear on the scene and, you know, become the bad guys. If you look at the Blackmore Bonds panorama video from a couple of months ago, the one missing link, did you notice what was missing from that panorama? Did you watch it?
No.
Well, the one thing that was completely in absentia was which was the major bank behind it, bank or banks, and there was no major bank mentioned, which is crazy, because without a major bank, none of the money could have, as they put it, vaporized. They said, everybody was saying at the beginning, the money just vaporized. This is what happens. This is how they create an exit, you know, when they do these illegal transactions.
So because what it is that the damage has been done now. The people are waking up. The more people that wake up, the more that we can actually do to stop this. So at the moment, we have a hopeless situation. If once you see with the securitization of our birth funds, that if we were to claim back all the money they've made from our birth funds, make claims, because on the top of the criminal prosecutions, we need some kind of we want to stay at this particular point in time to turn the tables and take all the crimes committed against us as crimes, as opposed to civil. So we don't require the services of any of the governments or the courts, and we're just saying we got precedents of this criminal prosecution. And so basically I'm looking for this highlighting of that fact that this matter's already been highly prosecuted in the criminal court. The bankers were jailed. Whether they were the right guys or not, I don't really care, because I believe that even when they say they've gone to jail, they don't actually go to jail. They get sent over abroad, and they get lookalikes and put them in jail. I don't know what they do, because I know that they do a lot of things that we would never believe that happened, like faking dead bodies, faking murders, faking deaths, faking death certificates and postmortems. And I know that firsthand from my baby niece, faking inquests and faking burials and church services, and just it's horrific. The family members are all aware of it, and then they go and meet up, on holiday somewhere. And so I really do, for our own sake, that we've been going for so long, decades of persecutions, and that I believe that precedents is we don't need to go to court, we don't need to prosecute even, but we just need the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, to
I agree with you on that. I do agree with you on that, because you see, if you look at the fatal flaw in our justice system, it's totally out of balance. It's like a two-legged tripod. It's not a tripod, it's missing a leg. The leg is missing, there is no criminal prosecution available readily for victims of crime. Every single criminal barrister you go to will tell you, I'm sorry, we only do your defense work for criminals, people accused of crimes. They only defend them. They don't prosecute them. Who on earth is prosecuting them? If the police were prosecuting them, things might be different. But do they have the repertoire of knowledge? Do they have the acumen on doing criminal prosecutions, the police? I doubt that very much. There's this total disingenuous play, dialogue going on, which is completely misleading. And so why should it be like that?
If we were to say, write to the resident recorder, Mark Lucraft, that this has gone on for too long and it's gone too far, and that you cannot justify running the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey if you haven't used the law of precedents in the criminal prosecutions that took place in 2018. These banks are still continuing with their crimes. That means that there's either your criminal court is not being run properly, or that you don't have a backing from the
the elephant in the room is that crime pays the FCA. Crime fraud pays. You know, they're all getting rich from the fruits of fraud. This is the problem. As you know,
we
they talk about
we really don't need to worry about the problem anymore, because we have the remedy in sight with this criminal prosecution, and we have the precedent. So the question is, what do you think will happen if the resident recorder at the Old Bailey does
I think we have to get the House of Lords to change the way the criminal justice system is being executed. You know, all this business of defending crime because it makes so much money, and you know, is nonsense. You know, the fraud, the scale of fraud, and you know, the economy has been drained of its resources and assets badly.
Let's say
of greed.
Induced, should we say that, because I don't think that we've suicide and manslaughter of the victims, because if you take somebody's livelihood away, their business, their home, you throw them on the streets, you've actually killed them. You don't actually care if they die. And a lot of people cannot come to terms with the fact that this is happening, as you say, so frequently on a daily basis, and increasingly more and more severely. And then there's involvement of children being stolen once the families are made homeless, put into care.
There's a whole conversation behind it, Neelu, with, you know, when you think of it, it destabilizes people's mental health, stress. It brings on illness, and every single person I know that's had cancer has been in some kind of terrible trauma imposed on them by the oppression of the way the governments are being run in this country and the way the criminal justice system fails to serve. You know, to me, these are very, very dangerous symptoms, and there should be warnings. You know, we have to change it. We have to stop putting up with it. We have to object to the absence of integrity in our justice system. You know, even lawyers have said to me that the major banks like Lloyds go around getting the big law firms to sign contracts to say they won't act against them, that they won't, even if asked, act against them. And I'll know worse than that, the victims, when they get their own hard-earned cash or borrowed money to fight back, guess what happens? They use the proceeds of their stolen money to buy off the opposition and shut it down.
I know, but what the point I'm trying to make is that we know that this criminal empire is run in a certain way, but we cannot, that it's come to that point now that, you know, we're 4 years on from the criminal prosecution. This country has no, let's say, you can't call it a democracy if it doesn't have an effective criminal justice system. It's a criminal empire of the world. That's the bottom line. And that's why there's a persecution of honorable, successful business people, whistleblowers, families, women, children, you know. So what we're saying is that we either, as you say, get the House of Lords to bring together all the victims of the banking frauds and use the precedent to the Central Criminal Court. And there is this document called the behavioural, it's an application, notice of application for behavioural order against the CEOs of the banks and the lawyers. And so it would be under the criminal procedural rules of this 31.3 that I've used to say, you criminally prosecuted these banks, these individuals are carrying on with the crimes, and I'm going to give them notice to apply for a behavioural order against the CEOs to stop committing the crimes that have already been prosecuted.
I think also it's a bit more simple than that. You know, the whole thing with sorry.
It's okay, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Can you hear me? I don't know what.
I can hear you. Okay. If you just stop a moment. Second. Okay, you're back.
Yeah, I think the thing is, when it affects them and their families, it's a different story. I think we have to start creating a more egalitarian approach to the application of the laws of England that are meant to be protecting all civilians. It's not happening. It's only for a select few. I also think we should not be having to pay to access justice. I made a statement that our right to access to justice is a right, not a privilege. In America, they have legal insurance for as little as $30 a month. They tried to set it up in England and it got stopped. Why did it get stopped? Every other country is offering legal insurance to protect your rights in law. You can't get it in England. Why? It's a closed shop. This is what's really disturbing people, and it's very short-sighted because eventually, it's starting to implode now. People don't trust solicitors anymore. They've been stung too many times, and they're working within a system that is flawed, fatally flawed. I think what we have to do is, call for change, call for compliance in the courts, call for inquiries. People.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that surely, if somebody's prosecuted criminally, then they're automatically bankrupted and all their assets are seized, and they cease trading.
But even when
so
they've not done
that's
anything,
the
they get made bankrupt because of cyber debts. The fact they're able to bankrupt people on the back of cyber debt is a very serious crime, because it's
no. My point is that by now the Bank of Scotland, the Lloyds banking group, should have been bankrupted at the point when they were criminally prosecuted, because the courts now know that they had no intention of stopping their crimes. They will continue with their crimes in contempt of the criminal court. That's the crime.
Well, yeah, exactly. Why did the Treasury hand them, said to them they could print their own money, 800 billion bailout, and then they did the share flotation, knowing they were worthless. They were using stolen, fiat money generated from false instruments offshore without any registered debts. This is what I'm saying. Very few people understand economics. I agree.
Yeah, but once we have the precedent, we have the criminal prosecutions, and now we know that they're in contempt of the criminal court, that we can prove that the criminal justice system is shattered, that we can bankrupt Lloyds banking group. Surely we can go for that.
But the problem is that they're pretty much running base. If you look at Lord Callanan and all the people that's been in charge, look how many insolvency ministers, how quickly they changed hands in the last 2 years. They must have had dozens of them in the last 3-4 years. They last 5 minutes. Nobody even.
But how many victims are there of the banks in the UK? How could you run a rough figure? Like, all the loans are fraudulent. All mortgages are fraudulent.
Banks don't lend money. Banks issue credit on your signature. There's a world of difference between lending money that they have on their system and actually issuing credit. They rely on your signature to securitize the debt on your signature. There's a huge misconception.
But they actually steal from your birth trust funds, don't they?
Yeah, well, they do, because they're using your identity. You're the grantor, but they assign it, and they're using assignment of the debt to other parties.
But now we have identified that they secretly securitize our funds. We have a right to recover what's in our securitized account.
Absolutely. But I think we're quite far away from that at the moment, because we've got no attention, nobody listening to the truth, nobody fighting.
Because we don't. These are convicted criminals. We go to the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey in London.
I'm with you. I agree. We mandate
the recovery of our securitized accounts,
and there should be very, very heavy penalties imposed on all those cheating the system.
Because by precedent, because they went to jail, the thing is, because we're dealing with this stolen money, this is proceeds of crime money that the banks have got in their pockets to run the criminal empire with, we would be encouraging them to continue if we were not going to go for their bankruptcy. And that should have been dealt with by now. And we'll have to find out where these monies have ended up, and claw it all back. All the securitized accounts, every single account that exists, will get put back to source. So whatever your money was that went into all this laundered secret accounts, that you have a right to have it recovered. That's your sweat money, as you call it, and you have a right to it. So the auditors will be able to find where your money ended up.
Oh yes, my
Because
dear, the same people that signed off the Clean Bill of Health fraudulently at KPMG turned up several years later pretending to be trustees on our estate without there being any issued claim against us to put it against. There's nothing to underpin a bankruptcy with us. It's so in your face, and we can't even get them to look at it because they're so entrenched in their systemic corruption. It's the corruption, it's the stench of corruption that's worse than anything, I think.
So I was like thinking, maybe if you've got the document that says that they've made a mistake, terribly sorry, they're going to wipe out this account that's got this debt in it, and then you've got the actual ongoing debt, this fake account is not been closed, it's still carrying on years later. So that's your simple open and shut case, that the bank has admitted that it created this fake account.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's no one discerning between shadow banks and the real bank. So the real licensed bank isn't in the picture. It's the shadow bank covering up and covering. We don't know,
but we're not going to justify that for them. There's a criminal prosecution that's dealt with all of this.
Because the bank, the bank is vicariously liable.
We don't need to go into each and every crime, because that's already, once it's prosecuted, it's precedent. That's it, finished. You don't need to worry about all of that, because that's all been put before the jury when they were prosecuted. So I think we've covered most of it, but if you want to do this again as another Zoom, we can cover up any other points that we might have missed out.
Yes.
So thank you very much indeed for all
and
that.
I think we should do another separate one as well, Neelu, on the death of Geraint Thomas, the Evershed solicitor who was found dead at the bottom of a cliff just 4 days before Christmas, no, a little bit more than that, on the 17th of December 2018. He was found dead in very suspicious circumstances, and a whistleblower letter followed in January, and it was dated February at the recipients' offices, including Judge Lucraft, and it suddenly all got shut down. It's extraordinary. There's so much in that letter which cross references with what's happened on our case. Even refers to.
So this was Judge Lucraft as the chief coroner at the time.
He was the chief coroner of England and Wales in December 2018, and in right up till about March, April 2019, then he became the head of the Old Bailey. Prior to that, he was the coroner. And the man who was the acting coroner didn't become the official coroner until about 5 or 6 months after the inquest took place. And of course, hardly any mention was made of the whistleblower letter at the inquest, which is shocking, because that whistleblower letter clearly explains what led to Geraint's death. It sets out clearly what went on, and the inquest wasn't worth tuppence. The fact that they didn't bother to do anything to.
So we'll cover that. We'll cover that at another time then.
Yeah, because my battery's very low and I'm going to have to go.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
So thank you very much. It's great that you've managed to get this aired.
So do you want me to put this out? Is that okay?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think hopefully it will add some value and open up more inquiry. We need to have an inquiring mind. We can't carry on like this.
So can people contact you if they've got similar cases to ours, and we could add them all together?
Yes, I think in a certain way, yes. If they contact me but don't expect replies quickly because I'm still in the middle of some commitments right now. But yeah, if we can gather if people have got specific concerns or questions. But you see, everybody wants to talk about their case ultimately because there's so many wounded people by these goings on. And that's something, it's all very well Lloyds Bank being one of the biggest backers and funders of community mental health teams UK. But the people running the CMHT, if I can be so bold, I would question how much do they really understand about mental health and what the role that stress and trauma plays in causing the mental health problems. Nobody would really have any real major mental health problems were they not being oppressed, harassed, pursued for their assets and the roof over their heads. This is the biggest precursor and cause of mental health. It is so disingenuous for Antonia Horta Osorio.
But mental health services have been used to discredit witness evidence of genuine witnesses and whistleblowers. We know that.
I know.
So this is that's part of the actual structure, the criminal empire.
Well, it's being used as another weapon to discredit people.
It's part of the criminal empire and how it's run and how it promotes criminals and how it recruits criminals with bribery and this promise of these careers. But they all end up getting shot in the back. They all end up, if they disobey the orders, they're disappeared. So, okay, thank you very much, Liz. I'll stop there.
Thanks ever so much, Neelu. You're a very brave woman and you're doing great work. Yes, thanks so much.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'll say goodbye.